All right, it's on. Nice. Here we go. Okay. Now, how do I go back? Yeah. Welcome to the Populist Alliance Daily News, September 9th, 2025. Let's go. First of all, I was just going to talk about sort of Trump's 12-dimensional chess plan. However, I'm not saying that he has one. I'm just exploring what if he did, and what if it was serious? Because sometimes, let me put it this way, you see some people out there, let's say, on Twitter or something, where they're not really telling you what Trump's plan is. It's more like they're retroactively saying, like, oh, like whatever Trump did, they're like, aha, that was the plan all along. Like it's all working according to plan. Trust the plan. So, there's some of that where it's hard to take seriously. But what I'm trying to do is take it seriously. So, like, okay, Trump's not a god, right? We're not talking about something where just whatever happens, it's all part of the plan, right? It's more like, imagine Trump's a very smart person, right? Someone who doesn't present himself that way, but who is, and that is a thing. I mean, I don't think that's impossible, right? That exists, especially in politics, because you don't really want to. Well, it depends, but unlike, say, if you were a physicist or something, where you probably would want people to think you're smart, or at least the other physicists. In politics, sometimes it's like you want to trick people a little bit. It could be to your advantage to seem like you're, like more of a regular person, right? And so let's look at the possibility that Trump is very smart, has a real plan here. And it could also, another thing is, smart is not just a sort of intellectual academic thing. There's a type of smart that is, just more based on experience, instinct, understanding people, right? Like, so if you've spent your life in politics, or in business, you could have a type of instinct for these things that where you kind of have a plan going in, but maybe you wouldn't be able to actually write it all out, right? You couldn't write it all out step by step, but you do kind of have a plan based on your instinct and experience and knowing kind of, you got an idea of like, oh, I'm going to move this person in this direction and that'll help me with this and that, but you couldn't write it out every step. It's more like you trust your instinct to be able to deal with certain situations. But there is a plan. So it's not just, because that's another theory, right? And that's not what I'm talking about. I should clarify. There is a theory that like Trump does have a really good instinct, right, for politics and for media and narrative and stuff. But he doesn't really have a plan, right? He's kind of just flying by the seat of his pants and he's just good at getting out of tricky situations, but he's always kind of living in the moment. In a sense, he's not thinking like that many steps ahead. That's not what I'm talking about here, right? What I'm talking about is that he actually does have a bigger plan. He does that. The idea is that he actually has some more like long-term, bigger picture, strategic thinking going on, and that it's smart. That not necessarily that's going to work, but that it's like a smart plan, right? So I'm going to look at what would that be. So we're kind of going to say, what if the plan trusters are right to some extent, and Trump's got a plan? What would that plan be? What would it be if Trump was smart and had a 12-dimensional chess plan? not superhuman, you know, but just a very smart strategic thinker who has kind of tricked people. And that's a big part of it. So I want to get to that as well. A big part of it is that he tricks people, and a lot of it wouldn't work if they thought of him as someone who's very smart. Now, okay, the first thing I was just going to deal with, I think this one's kind of the easiest: regime change in Europe. And what I want to talk about here is like, what's he doing with Europe, with the European leaders? What's going on there? What's the real plan that he has? Why is he? Let's see. What have been some criticisms of him? He made. Oh, like, one that I hear a lot from, I guess, from MAGA people is like he is getting manipulated by them, basically, right? They are trying to drag out the war in Ukraine. The European leaders, they're trying to sabotage, Trump's attempt to end the war. And Trump doesn't realize that. He thinks that the idea is that Trump is getting tricked and manipulated by the European leaders, that he thinks that they're actually trying to help him, but that he's really getting conned by them. And that's a criticism I hear from some, like you could say Trump supporters, I guess, mostly if they're anti-war, if they're or if Ukraine is a focus for them, they, like Steve Bannon. I don't know if he would say Trump's being manipulated specifically. Wouldn't surprise me that much. But people like Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, like the Duran, those types of people, they think Trump should just pull that right away. And they kind of think he's getting strung along by the Europeans and the neocons like Lindsey Graham and stuff. So here's a theory where Trump is actually the smart one, right? What if he wants regime change in Europe? He knows that it is going to be very painful. It would be very difficult for him to be too openly antagonistic towards Europe right now, where he would kind of just force them to turn against him. Right? It's a mistake to give people no choice, basically, but to be your enemy. So that's why he, of course, in some ways, he does insult them and stuff. But generally, if you see him when he actually meets with them, with the European leaders, it's more complicated with Zelensky. But I think every European leader I've seen him with, when he's meeting them, when they're sitting there together, let's say like in the Oval Office, talking to the media, he's usually very positive towards them. And that is sometimes criticized by some people because they're like, don't you understand? It's like, say, like a Steve Bannon or something might say, doesn't Trump understand like that Macron is just trying to, sabotage him, right? Macron's there to try to screw him over. Macron's not actually on his side. He doesn't want to end the war. He doesn't want peace. And so, like, why is Trump, saying all these nice things about him and acting like he believes they're on the same side? So my theory is, well, maybe Trump wants regime change in these countries, and so he's being nice to them so that they don't realize what's happening. So that he knows they're trying to play him, right? But he's also playing them, and he's basically screwing them over, mostly economically, by trying to force them to bear the burden of the war in Ukraine. That's one big thing. If you think about what's the most negative, in a sense, that he's been towards Europe, like what's the thing where he's been the most negative consistently towards Europe? It's the fact that they're not paying enough, right? And this has been pretty consistent with him. There's also truth to it, in a sense, if you're like into NATO. So you'll see other neocons, other people who hate Trump, other liberals and never Trumpers and stuff, parts of the deep state establishment, both liberals and conservatives in America that's like one thing where they'll often praise Trump or give him credit, is they'll say like Trump was right, that Europe needs to contribute more, spend more on defense, And he was right to try to get them to pay a higher percentage of GDP towards defense, that the U.S. shouldn't be carrying all the burden. And you even see European leaders say that, actually. It's not just the American neocons and stuff. It's even the European leaders will say, like, Trump's right about that. We do need to spend more on defense. Right. Anyway, what was my point? Oh, well, what's he really doing there? I mean, he's kind of screwing them over. Now, they are trying to get out of, like, they're claiming what the European leaders did was they claimed they're going to pay more. But then they're also aware that if they cut social programs, that's going to hurt them politically, right? So if they cut all the, if they cut because it's kind of, they have a sort of socialism, like social democracy, everything's paid for system in a lot of these countries. And there's going to be a lot of backlash from the voters if, France gets rid of like government healthcare. That's an extreme example, but like, let's say they just got rid of it completely and they're like, oh, sorry, all this money needs to, go to Ukraine or go to our military so we can fight Russia someday. There would be a pretty extreme backlash, right? And even smaller cuts, there's backlash. And these leaders are very unpopular. Especially the most like gung-ho pro-war, sort of pro-Zelensky leaders, like Macron, like Starmer. I think they're all like under 20% approval. So we're talking like, I don't know what it is, like 15% or something for Macron and Starmer. And then I think Merz is similar. Maybe he might be in the low 20s or something, but that's terrible. I mean, being in the 20s is terrible. I think there was something, I saw one poll where Macron had like an 80% disapproval, which is worse because sometimes you could have a low approval rating and then you could have some people who just are unsure in the middle or something. But it was like 80% disapprove of his handling of the war in Ukraine. So I think Trump is trying to screw Europe, but really more specifically screw over the European leaders that he knows hate him, that he knows are trying to manipulate him, and put them in a situation where their economy gets worse. Right? What's the other thing is if he were to actually end the war somehow, if he were to like force it to happen, which maybe, like the C. Bannon approach, where you just force the war to end. Well, no, that's a little different actually. Bannon says we should just pull all of our stuff out and just say we're done with it, as opposed to actually ending it. But let's say you really, used up all the political capital you had to like sort of force the war to end, force Zelensky to give up huge parts of Ukraine, and make other concessions. That would actually help Europe potentially. I mean, if they could then, if they were forced into that, then they could start getting cheap energy from Russia again. So that actually help European economies. So it's hurting them, and it's hurting the leaders that he hates in Europe. He doesn't hate all European leaders, I mean, but Merz, Macron, Starmer. I guess the ones he likes probably are, like Meloni and Hungary, Viktor Orban in Hungary. Who's the guy? Fico? Is that his name? Fico in Slovakia, I think. There's a couple that are more like Trumpy and that also want to end the war. So I don't think he's as interested in screwing them over. But I don't think he's interested at all, I should say. I think he wants to keep them in power, and he wants the other leaders like Macron and Merz and Starmer to be replaced by, more Meloni-ish or Orban-ish type populist nationalist types. And he's trying to make that happen by just kind of screwing them over so that their economy keeps getting worse, and then they become more unpopular. Eventually, they'll be forced out of office and be replaced by someone like Farage or who's the Le Pen, France, the AFD in Germany. And that would also fit with the trade deal. I think there's this sort of one-sided trade deal with the EU. I forget what the final tariff was, maybe 15, I think. for most things, but it wasn't a great deal for Europe. So Europe's already having a real tough time because they got their cheap gas from Russia cut off, right? Now Trump's also going after India, which is where a lot of European gases come from because they get it from Russia and then sell it to Europe, which is more expensive. So India's like making a profit. The Europe also gets LNG from. Oh, and I think it's actually oil. Let's say from India. I don't know if they're getting like LNG from India. I think it's oil as opposed to natural gas, right? So like gasoline, oil, other, I don't know, petroleum products. Whereas the natural gas, I think, is what they're getting is LNG from like Qatar. I prefer that, and in the U.S., which is way more expensive than just getting the gas straight from Russia through a pipe where it's kept in its gas form. LNG is liquefied natural gas, which means there's this really expensive, complicated process where you turn it into liquid. I think it's like some extremely low temperature, way below freezing or something. You have to, I don't remember the details, but anyway, it's very complicated and expensive. So it's way more expensive to buy LNG. Europe was much better off when they were just getting natural gas straight through a pipe from Russia. But now he's also maybe going to cut off or make their gas from India more expensive because he's threatening to tariff India, or he already has, actually. He already doubled the tariffs on India from 25 to 50, but he may be escalating to go after India even more. That could cause India at some point, they might decide, okay, they might give in and decide to stop getting LNG, stop getting oil from Russia or stop selling to Europe or something. He's also been criticizing Europe, for buying both gas and oil from Russia, either directly or indirectly through India. All of this stuff is going to hurt Europe's economies, make their leaders less popular. And the European leaders are going along with it because they are all committed to the idea of, being tough on Russia. Putin is Hitler, and we need to do everything we can to stop him. So they can't really use this to their advantage. They can't fight against Trump, right? And say, Trump's doing this to us. They have to say, yeah, we support it. We need to get, cut off all gas from Russia and starve Russia of revenues from gas. So by keeping his enemies close, by being publicly more, friends with these leaders, it puts them in a position where they have to be sort of complicit and publicly support the, I don't know, destruction maybe is too strong, but the damage being done to their own economies. And then they're also cutting some social programs. So they're also cutting some spending on that. What they could do, but probably won't, is cut immigration. They're probably spending money on that. But they're ideologically committed to it, so I'm not sure that they would really cut that. And then that's probably going to lead to more Trumpy type of leaders taking over in those countries, I think. So that could be what's he really doing with the European leaders? Why does he seem to act like he likes them and that he thinks they're trying to help him? It could be that he knows, I think, at least in this theory where we're looking at what if Trump was smart? And the stuff he's doing, there's actually a plan. So I think it would be he's going for regime change in Europe. And that's why he's doing this, because this is slowly destroying the economies of these countries. We had France and the UK are both on the verge of, I guess, default. The governments, they're not the government isn't going to actually go bankrupt. They'll have to get a loan or something. But it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad for these countries. It's not like it's happened. These are supposed to be some of the richest, most advanced, economies in the world. So I think the UK was maybe going to have to get an IMF bailout or something. That's something that should be happening to some third world country, not to the UK. Although it happened before, I think 73 or something, but it was a huge embarrassment. And the government, I think they lost power because of it, is what I remember hearing. The Labor government at the time, they got replaced then. So this stuff, France and the UK are in this bad position. Things keep getting worse for them. And Trump's kind of just waiting them out. Like he knows these leaders, or he's thinking these leaders are going to get replaced because they're going to be so unpopular. And then when he has his own people in Europe, he will have more maneuver room or more support to try to end the war in Ukraine. He also maybe knows that Russia doesn't really want to end the war. I mean, they, at this point, have pretty harsh demands, for ending the war. So they're going to really be asking a lot. And that could be bad for him politically, domestically, let's say, for Trump. I mean, if he gives into it, because the way that our media, most of the Western mainstream media, has made it seem like the war is a stalemate. They made it seem like Ukraine is actually doing pretty well. Some of them are even claiming like Ukraine's winning or something, which is insane. But if he were to give Russia everything they wanted now, the narrative in the West would be that, this is way too much, that he should have tried to negotiate harder. He could have gotten a better deal. And a lot of people are going to believe it because a lot of people think, wait, how do you have like a stalemate? How do you have a situation where Russia is doing terribly and then, all of a sudden they get like half of Ukraine or something in the peace deal, right? How do they get all this land that their armies haven't even taken? And that's because the media in the West doesn't really report the truth about the war, which is that Russia has been focused on trying to destroy the Ukrainian army, not on taking land, which is smart just from their point of view, from a purely like military point of view. So that is the regime change in Europe. Now, the next one, spheres of influence between great powers. This, I think, would explain a lot of the stuff Trump gets criticized for from, let's say, sort of the neocon, never Trumpers, the establishment liberals, where they say, Trump is weakening the U.S. position in the world. He's weakening like American domination of the world. What do they call it? American leadership in the world. Okay, I mean, Trump's just right about this in the sense that, like, it's just totally delusional, right? Like, the U.S. cannot dominate the world that way. It's not possible. It doesn't matter. It's not really a question of whether or not they want to, right? The only question would be whether you want a war, like, say, with China, or like a direct war with Russia or something. Do you want to go down swinging in that sense, in which, millions of people could be killed, could lead to a nuclear war? That could also lead to the like total collapse of the U.S., right? If things don't work out well for us. I mean, that's one of the better case scenarios in some ways. Like, no nuclear war. The U.S. loses the war to China or something, and then this causes an internal political collapse. Obviously, that's a lot better than nuclear war. But anyway, if you're smart, at this point, you kind of realize, and I think this would be the smart Trump, theory. Like, if Trump is smart, this is inevitable anyway, right? The multipolar world is inevitable. It's kind of like it's already happened. There's not really anything you can do in America. It's not like there's some magic button you can push. Like, there's so much work that would have to be done to try to get the U.S. to be in the position it was in the 90s again, in terms of the relative difference of how much power the U.S. had, military power, economic power, compared to China, especially China, but also Russia. So what Trump wants to do is divide the world up into spheres of influence. I mean, with the other great powers. Mostly it's China, but I don't know about Israel. Let me put Israel aside for now. One way you can interpret it would be sort of Israel would have a sphere of influence. I think that Trump approached Israel, it might be more complicated actually what's really going on there. But anyway, you have a sphere of influence where Russia has not all of Europe. I don't think he would go that far. I think it's just sort of Eastern Europe, obviously Ukraine, other parts of Eastern Europe. Probably like, what's it called? The Caucasus, like Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia. I don't know. Trump did just sign that treaty though with Armenia and Azerbaijan, where they created this corridor through Armenia that they named the Trump peace and love, justice, whatever corridor or something. So, but I don't think he's really that invested in, America trying to dominate like in that region when it's so far away and not clear how much it really should matter to us. So I think he wants to take the Americas, basically. The Americas is like America's in charge of the Americas, like the Monroe Doctrine. Go back to that. And then we don't really care that much about what's going on in the rest of the world. Maybe there'd be extreme things that'd be an exception, other than, unless it's Israel, that's sort of different. But we'll kind of go back to more of like a balance of great powers and spheres of influence. And I would say that would be smart, actually. Smart way to like avoid war, avoid a collapse, kind of like a, what's it called? A negotiated retreat or something, like an organized retreat from being the global hegemon, right? It's like everyone kind of, there's some weird sense in which like, due to like legacy things, like America still kind of runs the world in some way on paper, but like everyone kind of knows it's not really true. Like it's not really there. It's just sort of on paper. But it's just considered, it's going to change pretty soon, right? It's already changing somewhat, but just because of the way it was in the 90s and early 2000s, this idea that America can complain about some minor internal thing in like Russia or China or India or something, like, oh, you're being mean to some people like inside of China, or like China doesn't have, democracy or whatever. The idea that that would be any of America's business, that America would have anything to say about it, that is, that wouldn't exist in a multipolar world where, you have multiple great powers. It's just sort of like a hangover, right? It's this legacy thing from when America totally dominated. But it's like, it's almost like, if you think about your parents, like if, you're an adult, you got your own family now, you got your own kids, and like, I don't know, you could be like in your 40s, but you might still have like, your parents might come over and like criticize some minor little thing, like in your house or something about like some decoration or like just some totally irrelevant thing. Oh, you should put that over there instead, or that doesn't look good there, or whatever. And it's kind of weird, but it's like, because it's your parents, it's like, oh yeah, well, that's what parents do when you're like a kid. But it would obviously be insane if there was like just your neighbor or coworker or something, right? And they came over and you'd be like, this guy's like a total asshole. Like, what's wrong with him? This is none of your business, You don't come into someone's house and just start criticizing stuff like that, right? So in some ways, it's like this thing where the U.S. is sort of way out of line, but people kind of let it go because it's like a legacy thing where people are used to it. And I think Trump recognizes that. He recognizes the reality, and this would be smart Trump, which I'm not saying is definitely true. I'm just, how would we hash it out here? Like, what if Trump was smart and had a real plan, and there's a method to the madness, right? He's trying to peacefully coexist with the other great powers and let China handle Taiwan and probably the Koreas. I don't think he'd like pull out overnight from South Korea, but there'd probably be some negotiation with other great powers where they would pull some stuff out of like the Americas, or they would renegotiate some deals So that basically they're acknowledging like that this is sort of America's sphere of influence. And then the same thing would happen with uh, the other countries around, like China or Russia or India, maybe. I don't know how Brazil fits into this. I mean, Brazil's a pretty big country. They might not like the idea that they're under America's thumb. Just like I don't think India, even though they're bordering China, they don't want to be, certainly wouldn't want to be considered in China's sphere of influence, right? But anyway, or Japan also. Next, no wars. Oh yeah, I mean, so the no wars thing. Here, this is like a theory. This isn't central to the theory. About the Nobel Prize, it did occur to me that talking about the Nobel Prize constantly, Nobel Peace Prize, right, the way Trump does, it's almost, now it could be that he just really cares about it, and that's all there is to it. He just wants to get the prize, or that he's mad Obama got it, right, for nothing, right? But it could also be a kind of clever way of giving him an excuse to always want peace by personalizing it, by making it about him sort of seeking his own glory, which it kind of sounds bad, but right, normally you say that as a criticism of a public servant or a politician, that they're seeking their own glory. But it's believable as Trump, first of all, right? Everyone believes this about Trump, pretty much. He just wants all, the prizes and attention and praise and everything for himself. He's just really selfish, and it's all about his own personal glory. But if you get people to believe that, that can kind of be a good excuse to be able to do things that would otherwise really raise a lot of red flags, and people might kind of not notice it in the same way, right? Like if you came in as a peacenik, right, as just someone who's like, well, I just want peace and we should never have war, and war doesn't solve any problems, and you sound like some hippie or something, or if you're like Ron Paul, those people really freaked out. All of the, the military industrial complex, the deep state, the establishment, because, well, for a lot of reasons, partly ideologically they disagree, but obviously there's a lot of money to be made there. And they also, sometimes they look weak to people, especially to a lot of Trump supporters. They would say, I mean, some of them like Ron Paul, I guess, but sort of the hippie, more left-wing hippie type of peacenik, right? They would, think, oh, well, he's just a pussy. He doesn't understand how the real world works, right? So Trump kind of avoids that, where he doesn't seem weak and he doesn't seem as scary in some ways. Of course, the deep state hates him, right? The military industrial complex hates him and stuff. But I think that some of them think, well, look, actually, they're like not as afraid of him as they would be of who would be like a real just peace loving hippie who just is totally against war. Like that would really terrify them, because they're like, oh, we can't buy him off. We can't do anything. They actually this person actually really just wants peace. Whereas with Trump, they're like, oh, he doesn't really just want peace. Like he's not actually, like we could actually make a lot of money. Like defense companies and defense contractors and stuff, like I think maybe they see it as, okay, he's talking all this stuff about peace because he wants this prize. So yeah, he's just this corrupt, selfish guy. Yeah, we can work with that, right? That's really not that bad at all. Like that might be ideal. We got this guy who doesn't care about anything but himself. Is totally corrupt. We can manipulate him. We can get him into wars, probably, like as long as we figure out a way to still get him the peace prize or maybe we'll give him some other prize, right? Maybe we'll give him a war prize or something. He doesn't care as long as he gets a big prize, right? So I sort of had this theory that like maybe he's talking about the peace prize all the time because it sort of insulates him from other criticism. It's kind of counterintuitive. I think maybe this could also relate to Israel. It could be that if you take out the peace prize thing, if let's say he never mentioned that before, right? So, and then all of a sudden he just starts criticizing Israel, starts sounding like, Norman Finkelstein or something. saying like Israel needs to stop this war. Israel needs to stop doing this killing, and I just want peace and love and stop the fighting and the killing. He would get a lot of backlash, a lot of people who supported him, a lot of Zionist billionaires, the Zionist lobby. They kind of freak out, right? They might have, well, we know they have some kind of dirt on him with Epstein. They kind of released something already. But, there might be a full court press, right, reaction from them to try to get rid of him. But because of the Nobel Peace Prize, they might see it as, oh, yeah, no, he's not really serious. He's not really like anti-Israel or something. He's not really going to change anything in a way that like Ron Paul or Bernie Sanders or what Mamdani or whatever might do. Because he doesn't really care. Like, he doesn't really care about Palestinians or anything. He just wants a prize, right? So it's like less threatening in some ways. He can get away with it. And his own supporters, who are not all of them, like the ones who are like really, really pro-Israel, they can also kind of excuse it. They can be like, oh, yeah, like it's not that he's anti-Israel. It's that he wants a prize. And you know how Trump is. He always wants all these like prizes and awards and stuff. Like, okay. And they'll make some argument about Obama. Well, it's not fair. Why did Obama get it? He should, Trump should get it. What did Obama do? And they're right, by the way. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but Obama got it for, not for actually like ending a war or something. Okay, so let me jump to, the personalize everything, the next bullet point there. Yeah, this is the same kind of idea as what I was trying to say with the Nobel Peace Prize theory, but it's just, expanded out to everything. The fact that he makes everything about him, what is it? It kind of disarms maybe, or it kind of disarms in some sense some of his potential opponents, like people who he could push the same policy that would really freak some of these powerful people out if it was being pushed through, like, it'd freak them out if it was being pushed through real conviction. But because they don't believe Trump has any real convictions, because it's being pushed in a way where it's just about Trump only caring about himself, then he can get away with it. Right? I'm trying to think of, let's see. Oh, okay. Maybe, obviously this is all speculative, but maybe the India thing. So obviously the H-1B visas is a very contentious issue. There was a huge fight with Elon Musk. I think maybe it was even before the inauguration, but it was early on, right? It was either like before or right after, early in Trump's presidency. There was this big fight on Twitter with Elon and the tech bros, the other like Silicon Valley people who supported Trump, the All In podcast guys, against like the Bannonite wing, the more populist wing, on H-1B visas, because it's, what is it? What is the H-1B visa? It's just like a way for American companies to get cheap labor to undercut American workers, right? To bring down wages. So, and they have more power over these people because they're not citizens. So they don't have the same rights, and they can also just kind of be threatened and manipulated in different ways because, tech CEO could just say, like, if you get on a line, I'll just make your, I won't like apply to renew your visa or something, or I'll just not quite like deport you. I guess not like call ICE on you. I mean, it's not like that, but because it's more white collar. But basically, they kind of have your, not your life in your hands, but kind of your high standard of living that you would have as a tech worker in the U.S. compared to back in India, let's say. They have that kind of in their control in a way where they don't have to treat you as well. They don't have to give you as many benefits. They don't have to pay you as much, right? And your standards are lower, probably, I would assume. That's often the case with immigration that's tied to wages,
There's a whole different type of immigration in Europe as well, where people just come and get welfare. I mean, that also happens in the U.S. to some extent, but nothing like it is in Europe. So anyway, if Trump came out, and Trump at the time, I should say, when there was this fight between Bannon and Elon Musk, Trump took Elon Musk's side, right? And it would have been pretty bad for him, I think. Not saying he couldn't have survived, but pretty damaging if he had come out on Steve Bannon's side and essentially started a war with all the big tech people who supported him, like at the beginning of his presidency. That could have been a disaster for him. He then waited a while until he had this big falling out with Elon Musk, but it wasn't about the stuff that Steve Bannon hated about Musk, which is ideological policy stuff, right? It was about just like personal stuff. It was just personal beef between Trump and Musk. Which means that in some ways, like a lot of the people who liked Elon Musk and the other tech people, they didn't all turn on Trump then, because they see it as, well, okay, they had some personal problems, but I think they can, they can make up, or like, as long as Trump's still going to like look out for our interests, he's not changing his position on that. He's just has a personal feud with Elon now, right? But now this thing going on with India, okay, is Trump's been mad at India, right? There's the surface reason, let's say, like the sort of what Trump and his supporters say publicly, what you see in like the mainstream media talked about, or like Fox News, let's say. The Trump officials that go on Fox, or when Trump's interviewed, they say it's all just about Russia, right? It's like, well, the problem is India is buying oil from Russia, and so that's why we're doing it, to get tough on Russia, actually. Then you have the under the surface explanation that you'll see a lot of liberals say this. You'll see a lot of other people who are paying a little more attention. They'll say, oh, like the real reason is because Trump is mad that Modi wouldn't nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize and wouldn't give him credit for ending the war between Pakistan and India, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know if it was a real war, but there was a conflict earlier. It was a couple of months ago, I guess now. Again, that's totally personalized, right? So people, and most people, I think, seem to think that's the real reason, right? It's this personal thing that, like, Trump wants this stupid prize, and he's mad that Modi wouldn't pretend that, or wouldn't give Trump credit for ending it and nominate him for the prize. And then Modi is like personally slighted by this. It's complicated. It's sort of, a point of pride for India that they don't want to be treated like they're too, like the India and Pakistan are these two kids who are just fighting, in the schoolyard, which Trump uses this analogy all the time. The Russians just brush it off. They don't really care, but it is obviously pretty demeaning, right? This idea that like the other countries fighting, they're just like two, kids in school fighting, and then Trump's like the adult in the room who comes and tries to break it up. So from India's point of view, they really don't like that. They're offended by that. It's funny because Trump has said it way more in regards to Russia and Ukraine, or Putin and Zelensky, but Russia just doesn't seem to care. Putin doesn't seem to care. I think maybe like Putin never gets offended by stuff Trump says, which it could be that Putin is smarter in some sense than Modi, maybe that he kind of sees Trump's game and he kind of realizes like, it doesn't pay close attention to those sorts of things, right? He's just like sees it as Trump dealing with domestic issues by, Trump has to tweet that he's mad at Putin. He's going to get tough on Putin. And Putin just doesn't seem to take it seriously. Modi immediately took it really seriously, got really offended, refused to talk to Trump. I think he's like refused a bunch of phone calls from Trump. I saw something where Trump apparently had tried to call him like 4 or 5 times, and Modi like refuses to speak to him. So he's just really pissed. The Indian media has been very negative, I've heard, towards Trump on this. Okay, what's my point? Well, maybe what's really going on is that Trump agrees with Steve Bannon on the H-1B visas. And he said this before. He said this in his in 2015 and 2016. He was giving the Steve Bannon position on this. It would fit generally with this sort of right-wing populism, economic nationalism, populism stuff, that you would want to get rid of these foreign workers, right, and create jobs for Americans, raise wages for Americans. So what if, Trump's using this as an excuse to eventually go tit for tat with India, where they're escalating over stuff like tariffs, to the point where he says, okay, I'm like revoking all the visas for all like Indians. Indians are no longer allowed to get H-1B visas, right? But people won't see it as a Steve Bannon thing. They'll see it as a personal beef between Trump and Modi over this stupid, petty thing about the Nobel Prize, right? And because of that, they just won't take it as seriously. They'll just kind of make fun of it and laugh it off and be like, oh, yeah, like Trump, whatever. He wants some shiny medal. And they won't realize what's really happening. And it'll be harder for the tech people. Of course, they will... it'll be harder for them, I should say, to come out, to even recognize it, maybe even to realize like, oh shoot, like Trump's actually really like Steve Bannon. He actually believes that stuff, and he's going to do that. And they hate Steve Bannon, but they might not realize that that's what's really happening. If it is, I'm not saying for sure it is, but if it is, they'll instead think it's like, oh no, like Trump's feelings are hurt. It's his like petty personal stuff. So, well, maybe what we can do is like, they'll be like, I'll be the one CEO who will, suck up the most to Trump. So he'll make an exception for me, and he actually, I think he might for some companies, right? Maybe like he'll make an exception, for Tim Cook, who's been real nice to him at Apple, but not for Google or something. So he might even be able to get away with this policy, which I thought he probably wouldn't be able to, at least not this early, of maybe it's not deporting, but basically getting rid of the H-1B visa program. Which could be a big win for him in some ways. And it could also help him. Now, I mean, these companies could try to just move all the jobs overseas as well. But there's probably something Trump could try to do to prevent that, or to impose tariffs on it. I don't know how tariffs work with remote work. Like if you have a tech worker in India doing remote work, how do tariffs work on services? I think they don't have tariffs on services, right? But that could change. Anyway, I think it's because the U.S. exports so many services. So at the moment, that's not something that they want to do. But anyway, the point is that could be something that would help Trump, because it could create a ton of jobs for people who, many of whom are not like the core MAGA base as much, right? People that would be college degree, not necessarily. You don't need a college degree necessarily to be working tech, but more like white collar type of workers, right? Less rural, less like working class, blue collar. And a lot of those people, then it's also very male, generally tech, whether it's Americans or Indians or whatever. I don't know what the numbers are. It's like the actual like tech, like programming, I guess, as opposed to like HR and stuff. I think it's like 90% male or something. I might be wrong about the numbers, but it's definitely big majority. So that could be something that could help him expand out of space into like men who might have in the past, because of college degree or higher education level or something, might have fallen more into like being Democrats, which is the biggest. I think it was like, is that the biggest predictor? One of the biggest ones is like whether or not you have a college degree, whether or not you like Trump. That was one of the biggest predictors. Okay, so that's one example of how personalizing things could help. You could also say, well, it can hurt because it makes them look stupid and petty, and yes, but that's like kind of built in, isn't it? I get like, doesn't everyone already think that about Trump? Isn't that hasn't everyone always thought that about Trump? Other than his, I mean, he's got the really hardcore base of supporters who, I don't know, maybe don't think anything negatively about him, right? I guess those are the people who talk about like the fact that I guess Trump didn't take a salary his first term, which, okay, whatever, you know, what is like $400,000 or something. I mean, if you're a billionaire, but anyway, they'll talk about that all the time to show how he's just doing this to help people, or he doesn't really care about personal wealth or glory. But outside of that group, like most other people, they kind of think, yeah, that's the way Trump is, you know. And they don't really care. Like most people don't care that much about that kind of thing. Like whether you're, you know, selfish or something as a politician. What they care about is the results. And they also, part of it's that they're more cynical. A lot of people are more cynical than the establishment and the Democratic elites realized. I think they didn't realize how many people saw through them and just kind of saw through all politicians. So when they would try to sort of clutch their pearls about, can you believe Trump, I don't know, lied about something or said something mean or did something corrupt, you know, they were thinking that everyone would just be aghast. Like, I can't believe you, like a politician lie, you know, or a politician like be corrupt or whatever. But most people are like, yeah, of course, that's what they're all doing. So I think it could help Trump in some ways because the powerful people who are against him ideologically, they're against, let's say, what he really wants to do, what the long-term plan is, which is a lot of sort of Steve Bannon stuff. Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson stuff, let's say. That's the theory. And they would do everything they could right now to stop and directly fight against it, like if it was Steve Bannon or Tucker, because those people are like telling them what they want to do. Whereas Trump is pretending he doesn't really want to do anything other than just, you know, be told how great he is and get some like shiny medals or something. So they're like, oh, well, we're not like afraid of this guy. We can just, you know, bribe him or suck up to him or whatever. And while they're doing that, he's actually enacting a lot of things that, say, like Steve Bannon would want to do, but his enemies don't realize it, or a lot of them don't, right? They don't realize what he's actually doing because they don't see it as him doing it for the like Bannon ideological program. They see it as him doing it for some other stupid, petty, personal reason, right? Like the stupid thing with him and Modi. It's all personal. It has nothing to do with like an actual Bannon economic populist policy on H-1B visas or something, right? They don't even realize that's what's happening. So they'll be all focused on trying to get exemptions for their company and I don't know, maybe trying to call Modi or get them to be friends again or something. Personalize everything. Justify giving Ukraine back to Russia. So this is like something that kind of occurred to me as not the main reason, but maybe like one reason that Trump was, this was back when he's constantly talking about annexing or like taking over Greenland and Canada. Oh, and then also got Gaza kind of. I don't know if that fits into this as much, but definitely, yeah, a little bit maybe. Let's say Canada, Greenland, Gaza. There might have been some other ones I forgot about. But he was talking about it so brazenly, so openly, just the idea of, you know, just stealing land, just taking over land, right? So the idea that like he's kind of like breaking down the idea of the sacredness of the World War II, I guess, post-World War II borders or something, or the, you could say sort of post-Cold War borders, right? Or post, I mean, because there's all this stuff that happened, borders that the U.S. and NATO changed, right? In the states, the former Soviet Union states, when they went after Serbia. But anyway, the point is maybe one of the things Trump was trying to do, right? One of them, of course, is what I already talked about with the spheres of influence with great powers. He's trying to normalize that. But then also sort of like related to that, it could be specifically that he's trying to get people sort of normalize the idea of handing some part of some country over to someone else because that's what he's going to have to do with Ukraine. Right. So it's like maybe he knows there's really nothing we could do here, even if, we thought it was really important for Ukraine to maintain the borders that it had after it broke off in like 1991 or whatever. Even if he thought that, like, it's just not possible. There's nothing you can really do. They already lost so badly. But what you could do is break down people's sense of like the sacredness of these borders, and just kind of normalize it. Like, yeah, well, he did this also. He said something, this was quite a while ago. So early in his presidency, he said something about like the land that the Russians had fought for, right? Where there's some reporters asking something like, well, but you couldn't possibly be thinking of, letting the Russians have some of this of Ukraine, like giving them some of this land or something. And he's like, well, they fought for that land. They fought hard for that land. They lost a lot of people or something for that land. So he's kind of justifying this like law of conquest idea, right? Which goes completely against the rules-based order. At least it goes against what they preach, I should say. It goes against that. But it also goes against the post-World War II idea of we're going to keep all the countries as they are now. Let's put aside like Israel and Palestine issue. But for the most part, it's like you're just not supposed to change any of the borders, right? And we'll kind of treat that as if it's sacred. And some people do. The pragmatic argument for doing that was like, well, of course we know that these borders, like the current borders as they happen to be in 1945, were not set by God, right? It's just that we want to avoid war, and so we're just going to keep the countries as they are right now. We're just going to say that's what it is. And because you got to, you could go on forever trying to like hash out all these ancient disputes, right, over different areas. So we're just going to, fix it as the way it is now. That's just what it is. And there's a good argument for that, I think. I'm not against that. I think there's a good case to be made for saying we're just going to sort of start with like right now as the baseline, right? As these are the sacred borders. Now, that makes it hard then for him to give up part of Ukraine to Russia or to be promoting that idea. But it's easier the more he's kind of normalizing this idea of just taking over places like Greenland or Canada. Or I was wondering if he was going to start talking about like Cuba or something when he made Rubio Secretary of State. I don't think I've heard anyone say it yet, but I wonder if they're heading in that direction of just talking about like annexing Cuba and making it a state or something. Maybe Venezuela. I don't know. Maybe they're planning to, well, it'd be a demographic thing also be a concern maybe because, right. I don't know if they want that, but anyway, justify giving Ukraine to Russia by sort of normalizing the idea of like, these borders aren't really that sacred. It's all complicated. Right. And then same thing with the moving towards multipolarity, spheres of influence. You're moving away from the idea of like, I mean, it was always sort of fictional, but there was this idea that people agreed to like every country is equal, right? Every country is their sovereign nation. They have certain rights as a sovereign nation. And that's what they always say about Ukraine. Like Russia has no right to tell Ukraine about anything they can do within their own borders. It was always kind of ridiculous because it was never really true for anyone. But that was kind of an idea that was out there that a lot of people believed in. That was sort of something that was sacred again. So that's all going to kind of have to change, right? It's not that like all the borders have to change, but just the idea that like, say Ukraine can do whatever they want, or that like Mexico or Canada can do whatever they want, regardless of what America thinks of it. And some people believe that as a sort of like a principle, like a moral principle or something, right? That's going to have to change. Same for countries around China. Maybe I'm looking, like probably like South Korea, of course, Taiwan. Maybe Japan. I don't know. I mean, Japan can be pretty powerful. But anyway, the point is he's trying to break down this idea that all this stuff is sacred and can never be changed. And part of that could relate to the fact that he realizes that this Biden should not have started this war in Ukraine, huge disaster, and they're going to take a big fat L. All right, now, what else? Oh, that's all I have for the list right now. All right. Ooh, I did not mean to talk that long. Okay. Ooh. Bye for now.